And we have our guest here via Skype who is going to be Skyping in. Do we have Congressman Adam Smith? He is a Democrat serving Washington's 9th District. You there, Congressman?
I am.
I have to say, I'm sure you get this. You have a great name. I'm a big fan of Adam Smith.
Congressman, it's an easy name to remember, which is good in politics.
Congressman Smith, you and more than a dozen other House members introduced a bipartisan resolution to withdraw U.S. armed forces from engaging in a conflict led by Saudi Arabia with an extremist group in Yemen. Can you tell us how you decided to speak up on this issue?
Well, the district that I represent is interesting. Actually, it's incredibly diverse. There are over 160 different languages spoken in my district. And so name a country in the world, I have people from there. And I have Yemeni citizens who came to me and expressed concern about what was going on in Yemen. And as I looked into it, it's an enormous humanitarian crisis. And there are a lot of challenges in Yemen, certainly. But with Saudi Arabia, the coalition that they're leading right now, is just contributing to that humanitarian crisis. They are not seeking a peaceful solution. They have blockaded the ports. They have bombed civilians. They have contributed to the problem. And I don't think the U.S. should be any part of that. So I've worked with Ro Khanna, Congressman from California, who really took the lead on this, and as ranking member in the Armed Services Committee, brought it to my attention to try to make sure that the U.S. is not supporting Saudi Arabia in that effort in any way. Instead, what we ought to be doing is working through our envoy to the region to try to get a ceasefire and bring peace, because millions of people are suffering in Yemen because of the blockade, because of the war. They don't have access to food. They don't have access to water. And Yemen has a long history of conflict, different tribes, different groups. We need to bring them together and get to a peaceful solution, not perpetuate the war that's going on.
So, Congressman, I don't think anyone will dispute that we should seek for peace in the region, but the question is really about the terrorists in the region, the Houthis, who are being funded by the Iranians. So given that President Trump showed, I think, the right leadership to pull out of the Iranian deal, will this stop the flow of money, because the sanctions now are back in place, to prevent the Iranian support of the Houthi terrorism?
Well, it is, I think, unfair to put all of the Houthis into a terrorist bloc. But look, there is plenty of blame to go around. There is no question about this. The Houthis actually overthrew the existing government in Yemen and drove the president out of the country and helped to create that conflict. And yes, the Iranians have taken advantage of it. But the U.S. getting involved in a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia in Yemen is not advancing the cause. We shouldn't support the Houthis either. And we have sanctioned Iran repeatedly for precisely this behavior, and we should be doing that. But what we need is a more peaceful approach. And, we've worked with the Saudi Arabians before, early on, trying to figure out how to make this work. And the result is they've done a blockade. They've done constant bombing of the region. And let me also emphasize that there are terrorist groups in Yemen, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and nothing in what Congressman Khanna and I have put out there prevents us from working with Saudi Arabia to combat those terrorists. What it prevents is us choosing sides in the civil war. If there are terrorist groups, as you described, we are still free to work with them under the authorization for the use of military force that we passed. This is about choosing sides in the civil war.
Congressman,
I think we'd be in the wrong place.
I apologize, Congressman. So are you then saying that we should stop supporting Saudi Arabia in other areas as well? And if we do pull our support out of Yemen, do we now have a terrorist state that will take over Yemen and give Iran a proxy location within the Arabia region?
That is misunderstanding what's going on in Yemen. The Iranians are part of it. But to say that the Houthis and all of the groups that are opposed to what Saudi Arabia and the existing government are terrorists and are directly aligned with Iran is incorrect. This is more of a regional conflict. This is more tribal. This is more concerned by the Houthis that the existing government, the government that was there, was discriminating against them. They are not looking to be an Iranian proxy or to set up a terrorist state. I think that is a misnomer. Yes, the Iranians have taken advantage of the situation, but I think I speak to people who are from Yemen. who are citizens, who are in some Sunni, some Shia, on all sides of this. And it simply is not the case that this is a straight proxy war leading to the terrorist state that you described. So I just think we need to take a step back and try to reach a peaceful solution and try to reach a ceasefire. And it's an oversimplification to say, well, it's just, Iranian terrorists versus the Saudi Arabians. It's much more complex than that.
Well, Congressman, then, if the United States has armed deals with Saudi Arabia, which does benefit the state of Washington, as Boeing is one of your largest employers in the state. So our arms deals is a big part of our economy, and we do these deals with Saudi Arabia as part of our overseas policy. So should we really be rethinking how we approach Saudi Arabia and how we utilize them as allies?
A couple of things about that. Number one, Saudi Arabia has been an ally in the fight against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And look, Saudi Arabia is an incredibly complicated relationship because many times they have worked with us to combat terrorism, as you described, most notably with the rise of ISIS in Iraq and Syria. But at the same time, when the Syrian conflict began, when democratic protesters stood up against the brutal regime of Assad, Saudi Arabia and others backed the most radical extremist rebels there. They backed al-Qaeda affiliated groups. They backed ISIS affiliated groups against Assad. And that's part of the reason that the true Democrats, the people in Syria who simply wanted peace and freedom, were driven out in place of these extremist groups. So Saudi Arabia is a very mixed bag. Let me just also say, I will never in a million years say we're going to sell weapons to other countries just because it's good for jobs in the state of Washington. If we are engaged in a military relationship with a country, it should be good for peace and security and for our interests. We should not be in the business of selling weapons globally, regardless of how many civilian deaths it causes or how much it impacts, just because it's good for business. That's not the way that I'm going to approach foreign policy.
All right, Congressman, I want to change gears a little bit to talk about your House colleagues over on the Judiciary Committee led by Congressman Goodlatte, who just issued a subpoena for the memos by Andrew McCabe that were used reportedly or that he took right after the firing of Jim Comey. And the House had already previously just put a request to get these memos, and those requests were denied, hence the subpoena. Do you agree with that action?
I'm not 100% familiar with that specific action, so I could not speak intelligently about that particular piece of it. I do think that the House Intelligence Committee has done a very, very poor job of investigating the case against Russia primarily and against officials in the Trump campaign for possible conspiracy to impact our election. Instead, they focused and said that it's an FBI conspiracy. You've heard the president say over and over again, it's a witch hunt. Look, there is no question that Russia interfered in our election. There is no question that people at very high levels of the Trump campaign were involved with those Russian operatives. That's the information we should be trying to get at. I'm not familiar with the specific pack of documents that you've talked about.
Do you think that President Trump should fire Rosenstein, or if he does, would you, if the Democrats take the House over, support impeachment if he were to take that action?
Well, not because of that. No, I don't think he should support. I don't think he should fire Rosenstein. I think there's been enough disruption. I think Rosenstein should be allowed to continue to do his job. And if President Trump were to fire Rosenstein, everyone would assume it was an effort to undermine the Mueller investigation. And that's the biggest problem here. The president from the very beginning should have said, look, I've seen the evidence from the intel community. Russia interfered. Let's have a fair investigation. Let's reach the result and see where we're at. Instead, he's fought it at every turn. He has tried to undermine it. He has called it illegitimate. He has questioned the very integrity of our own Justice Department, of his own Justice Department, of the FBI, of the intelligence community, undermining our credibility and faith in that. So that's what I think should happen. As far as impeachment proceedings are concerned, I think we ought to see Mueller's report first. Now, I will tell you, based on the evidence that has come out, there seems to be a lot of evidence that the president's campaign was involved directly with the Russians who were trying to influence our election. And then there is a mountain of evidence that the president tried to obstruct the investigation into those actions. And we'll definitely think that that's something we should probably move forward on.
So, but Congressman, you mentioned the Mueller report. We don't have an end date. Would you support an end date then to get that report?
I don't think we should support an end date. And I will say this. Let's say, if it gets to be like 6, 8 months, if it drags on past a certain point.
What is that point?
I don't know for sure. I'd have to look at the details of that, but I would think that point would be sometime early next year. And the other thing is, if the Democrats get control back, the Intelligence Committee on the House side could actually do a legitimate investigation the same way the Senate did. The Senate did it in a bipartisan way and reached some pretty strong conclusions about what happened. So we could do our own investigation. I don't know. I'm not going to say on February 1st, if Mueller hasn't given us the report, we have to decide to go forward or not. I think after this election, once we get into December, depending on who's in the majority, then it might be appropriate to say, okay, we're going to give him until March or April. But right now, I think we're optimistic that by the end of the year, this investigation will be wrapped up.
Well, I think a lot of your Democratic colleagues wouldn't even wait for a report if they win the House. That's just my personal prognostication.
Well, let me say about that. It's not a matter of waiting for a report, just waiting for a report. We have to have clear and convincing evidence to proceed here. Whatever anyone thinks about President Trump, and certainly I'm no fan, impeachment is an enormous step. We have to be sure of the evidence in front of us. It can't just be because we don't like President Trump. It can't be because we don't like the way he speaks. It can't be because we don't like his policies. It has to be because we have clear evidence of crimes and misdemeanors that rise to the level of an impeachable offense.
Absolutely.
I think we should be patient, not rush into it. It is simply too critical a decision to rush into.
Absolutely, Congressman. Thank you for joining us, Representative Adam Smith, and we truly appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks for the chance. Appreciate the opportunity.